Welcome to the GTI Tours Podcast. Join us as we go behind the scenes and discuss with trip leaders, guides, biblical scholars, and more to bring the land and the lessons of the Bible to life. Hello and welcome to the GTI Tours Podcast. My name is Rich and I'll be your host today as we dive into the land and the lessons of the Bible. And this is going to be fun. One of those exciting things, as you guys know, as I always bring on guests and people who I've gotten to know over the times of running trips. And this is, again, one of those moments. Our good buddy Jericho, who's in the office, likes to do a little bit of reading. He's been getting into the weeds in some areas, but then he's also just been reading some fun new scholarly work that is out there. And he came to me one day and he's like, "Hey, Rich, we should do a little thing on Jericho." And I said, "That sounds great because we don't talk about Jericho enough." And so that's what today is. We've got a chance here to have Brian Wendell on this podcast today, and he's going to get a chance to walk us through what he's been working on, what he's been studying, what he's been finding. And I think you're going to find this very fascinating. And I really hope, too, that if it draws you into wanting to know a little bit more, that you'll check out the resources that we're going to post in the show notes. We're going to have a book that he's been working on and also probably many other resources that will help you know your Bible just a little bit more and to dive into the fun that's there as we begin to pull back the layers and understand the context that the Bible is written in. So, Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rich. It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me. This is going to be good.
Where are you coming from right now? People know I'm in Michigan. You are in a place just as cold as me.
Yes, I think I'm a little more north of you. I'm up in Canada, and so it is very cold up here. It was like minus 23, 24, which I think is like Celsius, which is like -9 Fahrenheit or something around there. And so that's what I walked my dog in this morning. So you bundle up and away you go. This is how we do it up here.
All right. I'm not going to complain about my 20-degree Fahrenheit today. You take the cake on that one. But let's introduce you a little bit to our audience since I'm just getting to know you. You and I have had a couple of conversations, and I think that they're going to be interested to know who you are because in our pre-conversation just now, you just told me all the different hats that you've worn over the past few years. So maybe enlighten the group a little bit.
I have had some amazing experiences in life. The Lord just have brought them my way. When I was in university, I was a mascot, a professional mascot of a minor pro hockey team. And then coming out of university, I was an elementary school teacher for 8 years. And then the Lord called me into the ministry. And so I went into to be a Bible camp director, summer camp director for 12 years, 13 summers. And then from there, the Lord called me into pastoral ministry. So I have been a pastor for the last 10 years up until December 31st. And then beginning in January of this year, I started working for the Associates for Biblical Research. And they're the group that I have excavated with. I'm an archaeologist. And so they asked me to come on board and I do some marketing and public relations for them in addition to a lot of other jobs. And I get to dig every year over in Israel as part of this deal too. So I'm just excited about it. It's been a great ride.
That right there is a lot of hats. And one of those hats being a pretty big one as a mascot. And as you guys know, my background's camping as well. So the moment he told me that, I was like, oh, now I know why we have this connection. It's those years of doing camp ministry and the effects that it has. So now, friends, I know a lot of people who do archaeology and they're all really great people, but sometimes they're a little just academically like above my head, just like right over the top. And what I've enjoyed about Brian is that he, with his pastoral background, his camping background, all of these things, he really makes these concepts and these ideas and what they're finding accessible to you and me. And I think that's why this is a great moment for our GTI podcast is that those of you who love learning about the Bible, you love learning about the land, this is a guy who is going to be a great resource for you. So as we dive into this, why don't you give just everyone out there just a little bit of an introduction into how you define archaeology? Like, what is archaeology when you say you're an archaeologist?
Yeah, that's a good place to start because people quite often will say to me, "Have you found any dinosaur bones?" And I say, "No, because that's a paleontologist. I'm an archaeologist." People say, "Oh, have you found any cool rocks?" Well, we kind of have, but that's a geologist. I'm an archaeologist. An archaeologist is someone who studies the material culture of ancient peoples. And so anything that humans in the past have made, it can be a wall, it can be a piece of pottery, it can be something they've made of metal or stone, anything that relates to ancient people and their cultures. And then, of course, we have a subset of that, which we sometimes call biblical archaeology or ancient Near East archaeology, which is looking at the material culture of the people, the places, and the events that are mentioned in the Bible. And so that's kind of what we do as archaeologists. We're looking for the things of people in the past that by which we can learn about them and what their way of life was like.
And if you've been to the Middle East, especially Israel and to the Levant and these different areas over there, you see that there's plenty to do. Like there are dig sites everywhere, and it's so much fun to walk upon them and see them in action. But it is a laborious job. I mean, you guys are always working, I feel like, in the summertime, and it's so hot, and you're out there digging, and you're unearthing what was below and trying to tell the story, or at least bring evidence to light of like what it was like, what was going on. So how does that for you as a believer interact with your faith? Because I know that sometimes those two can be sometimes difficult, at least in the professional world.
Yeah. So one of the things that I do is first of all, I come at the archaeology and I say, listen, I want to know about this site. I want to know about these people. What can we learn from the ground? But when we're digging at a site that's a biblical site, like Shiloh, where I dig, or Shiloh,
Mhm.
we have an ancient text, the Bible, that tells us about Shiloh. So we get to look at how the archaeology illuminates the ancient text. It tells us more about those people. Sometimes it affirms the biblical text. And in terms of my faith, one of the verses that I often keep coming back to is at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke. Luke said this, Luke chapter 1, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, and here it is, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. And so my kind of paraphrase of that, if you will, is that carefully investigating everything, good research about biblical history should lead to building your faith. It should make you more certain of the things you have been taught. And I would say that's certainly been the case for me. That's what I have found. The more I learn about archaeology, the more I'm engaged in it, I find myself, my own faith being built up.
And I find the same thing when we run trips over there. I've been to Israel over 50 times, and I always walk away learning something new. And I feel like that's the beauty of the land right now is as you guys are digging, as people are finding that the story, the Bible, it continues to come alive just with what's being found. And as the culture and all these pieces come alive and come out. And so it's a really cool thing. I think our people have resonated with that on these trips. And it's fun to have guys like you who are basically writing books that we can read to help us understand it even better. Because everyone always asks me when they come back from a trip, how do I get some more of this? And we're always looking for good resources. So I think with you, we just found a great one. What are places that you guys have been digging in? Because I know you've spent some time in multiple places.
Yes. So my excavation experience is at Shiloh, biblical Shiloh. I've been excavating with the Associates for Biblical Research there for 3 years now. I'm an assistant square supervisor with them. This year, I'm going to take a turn as a square supervisor. The Associates for Biblical Research. This is our third dig in Israel now. We have been excavating for, oh my goodness, over 30 years, close to 40 years now. We first, and it began with the search for biblical eye, or AI. And so we first dug at a place called Nisia, and it didn't appear to match the details we see in the Bible. And so we moved to a different site, Kirbet El Makader. And our final dig report on the Bronze Age in particular, the period of the conquest, is actually probably going to be published in the next month or two. And so people will be able to get to see our information on that. But we believe that it's a good candidate for biblical eye. And now we have been digging for 7 years as an organization at Biblical Shiloh. And so my experience is only at Shiloh, but our organization has many, many years of excavation experience in the Holy Land.
If you've been on trips with us, some of you have been to Shiloh. If you have not been with us to Shiloh, you need to go. It's an incredible
Gotta come to
place.
Shiloh. Yeah.
To stand in a location where you can kind of just like see where the Ark of the Covenant and where the tabernacle would have been. I mean, that blows my mind every time because it's like right there.
Yeah, the first time I walked down to the northern end of the tell, and I just looked at the hills that
Hmm.
surround Shiloh, and I just imagined the tents on those hill of the ancient people who had come for one of the festivals there, because that's where they all would
Where
have
they
stayed.
camped.
They all
Yeah.
camped in sight of the Mishkan, right? The
Hmm.
tabernacle. And so, yeah, it's an amazing thing. And then for us, I will say this: our dig director says the bus leaves Jerusalem at 4:59 every morning. So it's an early morning for us, but we get out to Shiloh to watch the sunrise every morning. And that is one of the most glorious things you will see on this earth. So, yeah, do come out to Shiloh. It's a great sight to see.
Makes me want to go right now. Now, you guys have been digging in multiple different places, and even on trips, we've been over on the Jordanian side and kind of pointed out where Sodom might be and things that you guys have done in those regions. All this, places you've been, you then went and did a master's thesis about Jericho, and now you're working on a PhD focused on Jericho. What made you go that direction when you're spending all this time elsewhere too?
Yeah, I did not set out to write about Jericho. I will be honest. I will tell you what I set out to write about. I was going to do a thesis on Sergius Paulus, the
Nice.
proconsul of Cyprus.
Yep.
I had written a peer-reviewed article. That was what I was going to do, and I joked with my faculty advisor, I could do that. That's the safe choice, right? 6 people will read my thesis, and I'll get my degree and I'll go on happily with life. But then I fell down this rabbit hole of Jericho. And here's why. I noticed as I wanted to know what's the latest research on Jericho showing. And so I started to research that, and I discovered that there had been a excavation ongoing at Jericho for almost 20 seasons by that point. I think when I started down this road, it had been 17 seasons. They're now up to 20. And I realized very quickly that there were very few Christians who were interacting in any meaningful way with the research of Lorenzo Negro and his team from Sapienza University in Rome. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And so I fell down the rabbit hole, so to speak, at looking at this information. And I realized, I said to my faculty advisor, boy, the safe choice is Sergius Paulus. But if I go down this rabbit hole, then I paint a big target on my back, because Jericho is a very controversial site because of the different views that people have held, and very passionate views and lots of rhetoric. And I try to avoid that. I want to learn and see what I can find out about Jericho. And so the more I researched, the more I realized that a lot of the information that was being recited about Jericho, and particularly in the Christian community, was over 3 decades old. And so I thought there needs to be an update. We need to look at what is the latest research saying. And so that's why I decided to do Jericho. So what I did was I started reaching out. I read everything I could from Lorenzo Negro. I reached out to universities all over the world who had Jericho material in them. And then I made a database, a personal database of all of the known late Bronze Age artifacts, sherds, vessels. And so I have over 570 artifacts in my database, which is why I'm carrying on doing a PhD in it, because I only used a fraction of that information in my master's degree. And so I decided to go a little more general, and now I'm going to try and dive in a little more specifically, particularly on the ceramics, the pottery. I think that's kind of my plan. I'm not there yet. I'm still doing my coursework, so I'm not yet in the dissertation phase. But yeah, I just became passionate about Jericho and realized we needed an update. So that's what I've tried to do.
When we put trips together so many times, I'll ask people, like, if you were to go to the Holy Land, what would you be excited to see? And they'd say things like, oh, I can't wait to see Nazareth, and I can't wait to see Bethlehem, and I can't wait to see Jericho. And these are actually locations that most people don't go to, because there's not too much for a tourist to see there. So when we get to the concept of Jericho, everyone knows Jericho. They know the story. They saw the flannel graph when they were a kid of the story of the spies and Rahab and like the whole deal and the walls coming down. I mean, even Elvis Presley sang a song that we all know, about the walls of Jericho. So it's a well-known story, even to those who are not believers. And so I think this is super fascinating that you're working on this. And you alluded to it. You said there have been multiple thoughts over the years that have kind of come into question. What are, just so our viewers know as we get into this, what are the couple of main views when it comes to Jericho, that you would go see today? Like if you were to go stand there, what are people being told?
Yeah, so maybe it's easiest to kind of go through chronologically what people did. So the first major excavation there were a couple of minor soundings in the late 1800s, but the first major excavation was Sullivan Watsinger's excavation there in the early 1900s. And they were looking for, they wanted to obviously study the site, but particularly because this is a significant biblical site, they were interested in walls of Jericho. And in fact, one whole layer, they labeled it the Israelite layer. That's what they labeled it. Now they misdated it, and by the way, I'll just say their dig report is still fantastic to this day, just how meticulous it was. And so they thought that they had found, things related to Jericho and the Israelites. And then in the 1930s, John Garstang dug there. And Garstang believed that he had found the walls of Jericho. And he's the one who put together the stratigraphy, the initial stratigraphy anyways, that we look at now, calling it City 1, City 2, City 3, City 4, City 5, and so on. And so just for our viewers, your listeners, a tell is a mound, an ancient city that has layers on top. I always compare it, because I like chocolate cake, to one of those nice layered chocolate cakes, right? And every layer is a different stratum, and the lower you go, the farther back in time you go. And so the question has been, which city is to be associated with Joshua, or what I call Joshua's Jericho? And since John Garstang's excavation, it really has centered around City 4. That's been the whole debate, because the next lady who excavated there, Kathleen Kenyon, in the 1950s, she corrected some things that John Garstang had got wrong. He misdated the walls. The walls that he thought were the walls of Jericho were actually over 1,000 years older, from the early Bronze Age. But she looked at his City 4 and she said, that's actually Middle Bronze Age. That's like over 100 years before Joshua. And so that set off this furious debate, of course, because Christians had said, oh, look, Joshua's Jericho has been found, Garstang found it, and Kathleen Kenyon comes along and says, well, that doesn't date to the time of Joshua. And so now she has been misunderstood, I'm convinced, because she believed that there was late Bronze Age finds there. She found them. She found late Bronze Age pottery. She excavated a late Bronze Age home that she said that had an oven in it and a dipper juglet. And she said, I imagine a Canaanite woman standing in her house beside this oven, dropping the juglet at the sound of Joshua's trumpets, walking around. So she certainly did think there was a conquest. She thought it was historical. She just didn't think City 4 was it. But from her on, the debate around City 4 has been the debate in the 1990s, early 1990s. Actually, one of the associates for biblical research, one of our archaeologists, Dr. Brian Wood, did some research, and with the data that was available to him at that time, he believed that Kenyon had misstated the city, that Garstang was right. And then, of course, for the last, since then, over 3 decades now, people have argued about that. But since that time, there's been this excavation ongoing, and nobody has really interacted with that. And so when I started out interacting with it, what I realized was that Lorenzo Negro essentially has affirmed Kathleen Kenyon's date of City 4. Basically, he has said she was correct in her dating of City 4. But his stratigraphy has a late Bronze Age city there, City 5. And so what I came along and did was I basically shifted the paradigm in the talk about Jericho amongst those who believe that this is a historical event. Because there is this other school of thought that says, well, those events weren't written down till over 1,000 years later by some supposed group of priests who were trying to invent a glorious backstory for their people. But for those of us who take this as an ancient text, I don't agree with that theory. And because I take it as an ancient text that is historically reliable, I want to know, what can we see about Jericho? And so where I shifted the paradigm was I said, how does City 5 align with this description we have? Because here's the thing, Rich. We only have one ancient inscription, one ancient literary text that describes this battle and the destruction of Jericho. And that's in the Bible. And so we have to compare the archaeology to that. And so that's what I've done. Basically, I looked and I said, is there evidence that it was occupied at the time that the Bible says Joshua was coming into the land with the people of Israel in the conquest? Was it fortified? Because it's got walls that came down. That's the biblical description. And is there evidence of destruction? around that time frame. And so that's where my thesis centered.
This is so much fun, friends, because I think one of the things you could hear as he's saying it right there is that you've got a bunch of different people who have come and done some archaeology, and they're not debating whether Jericho was a real place. Everybody knows where Jericho is. Like, you can go today and visit the tell. It's right there. It's right next to a spring. It fits all the biblical pieces to that. What they're debating, as he was saying, is that you've got multiple layers. Call them City 1, City 2, City 3, City 4, City 5. They're debating, when was the conquest? What layer is Joshua's conquest? And to kind of understand that a little bit more, we don't have to dive too hard into this, because this might just be a whole nother conversation that we could have. And I'm setting this up here because I think I want to get him back on the show. Is that you've got to figure out where you date the conquest, and that kind of goes back to dating probably the Exodus a little bit. So if you want to give just a real short, I know, can't believe I just said that. If you want to give us a basic understanding of how at least you view it, that would help us as we understand how you're dating into this.
Yeah, because if you're going to see how the archaeological evidence aligns with this ancient literary text description of the destruction, then you need to be looking in the right time period. Otherwise, you're not going to find the right stuff. And so the Bible indicates in 1 Kings 6:1, we all go there, regardless of what time frame we think the Bible places the Exodus, and there are different views on that. We all pretty much start at 1 Kings 6:1 because it seems to be the clearest. It says, in the 480th year after the children of Israel came out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign, it even gives the specific month, he began building the temple. And so if we know when Solomon began building the temple, and most people would place that somewhere in 966, 967, give or take a year or two, then it's simple math. You count back 479 years because it's in the 480th year. So 479 years have elapsed. So you count back, and that would place the Exodus sometime in the middle of the 15th century. 46 is the number that you hear bandied about probably most often. And that would be called the early date. There is another view that is the late date, which is that the Exodus took place sometime in the 13th century. And that's based on they believe that that's a symbolic number, not an actual literal number of years. Where I come at this, I'm an early date guy, but I'm uncomfortable pinpointing a specific year. Mm-hmm. And so I take a window approach. And so when you know when the Exodus was, they wandered for 40 years. So you subtract 40 years from that. I believe that the conquest of Canaan, the fall of Jericho, happened sometime around the end of the 15th century, the beginning of the 15th century. I actually have this 80-year window that I've kind of said, sometime within this 80-year window, I'm going to look at any evidence from about 1426 BC to 1346 BC. And is there evidence in that window that it was occupied? Is there evidence for fortifications? Is there evidence for destruction? And so I'm an early date guy, but I take a window approach, which is maybe I'm a little different than some of my colleagues who'd like to try and pinpoint a specific year. That's just, I see too much ambiguity around the text.
So friends, that's where you get as he's saying, the late Bronze Age. You're getting this timeline space. It's there. And I'm just going to throw the plug. Come with us on one of our Egypt trips. We talk through all the options that are there, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. We won't necessarily nail it down to one specific anything, but you'll know your options. And Brian just did that so well right there, so quickly. Something that takes us hours to talk through, he just did in like 2 minutes. So mad respect for that right there. Well, let's keep talking through this with the window approach that you're taking. You're now looking, and you had said it earlier on in this call. You said that you've been cataloging like all these things that have been found. I'm assuming within that time period, so that you have them. Did you find that there was city and habitation, fortification, and destruction within this City 5 that you were looking at?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is that yes. When we look at occupation, the primary thing that we use to date an occupation is pottery. Because pottery forms change over time. I was telling someone just yesterday, I said, if we were digging in my backyard and we dug up this kind of plasticky Melmac type plate, our listeners would probably go, 1970s, right? Because that was 1970s, early 80s, maybe late 60s. That's when these plastic Melmac plates were really, really in. So but plate styles have changed over time. And so the same thing is true with pottery. And so we can tell when we pull pottery out of the ground base, if we have some diagnostic, like either a rim or a base or handles, or it's decorated in some way, that all is diagnostic and helps us date it. And so with the late Bronze Age, and so I'm going to use some terms here, but just so everybody knows, generally the pottery that we're finding at Jericho that is specific to City 5 fits in this, what we would call the late Bronze Age 1-2 horizon. So the end of the late Bronze Age 1, beginning of late Bronze Age 2, and that's just fancy archaeology talk, meaning end of the 15th century, beginning of the 14th century, or 26 to 1346 BC, right in my time range. And so we have discovered pottery in two different places. So we've discovered pottery on the tell itself, particularly at the top, just overlooking the spring on the eastern edge of the tell. That's where that was the prime real estate, it appears. That's where there is a series of palaces. The early Bronze Age palace was there. And then when the early city was destroyed, the middle Bronze Age palace was there. It went through a number of destructions and renovations. And then the late Bronze Age, it seems to have been shrunk down. It doesn't seem to be like a full-size palace. Garstang called it a middle building because it was in the middle between the Middle Bronze Age and the Iron Age palace. And Negro calls it a residency, so not like a full palace. And then the Iron Age palace was built right there too. So it's all there. That's the primary place we have found the pottery on the tell. But then to the northwest of the city, John Garstang excavated a series of tombs in the necropolis there, and 3 of the tombs were used in the late Bronze Age. They were, it appears, made or dug in the Middle Bronze Age, so 100 years or so before, even more than that, before Joshua. But they were used again at the time of Joshua, and there we have some beautiful, beautiful pieces of pottery that are whole vessels. So not just sherds of vessels. And so the other thing that he discovered there were scarabs within those tombs of specific pharaohs. And so those can be helpful. Now, they're not always helpful. Just because you find a scarab of Thutmose III doesn't mean that it dates to the reign of Thutmose III.
They like to be reused.
They did. And he was one of the most popular pharaohs. The way I'm from Canada, so I compare it to collecting hockey cards. You know what? They're still producing Wayne Gretzky hockey cards because he was the greatest. And so just because you have a Wayne Gretzky hockey card doesn't mean that it dates to when he played. Just because you found a scarab of Thutmose III doesn't mean that. But here's where it does. If you find a scarab of a pharaoh within a stratum that dates to that pharaoh, now that's very important. And that's what we have with Amenhotep III. And so we have this series of scarabs. We have a Thutmose III. We have a Hatshepsut scarab. Unlike Thutmose, she was hated, not very well liked. And so her scarab's helpful for dating. And then we have Amenhotep III. That takes us from the middle of the 14th, 15th century into the beginning part of the 14th century. This is the time frame I'm looking for occupation dated right there. Plus, we have a cuneiform tablet that Garstang found. Now, it's not readable, but he described it as much like the Amarna tablets. We could do a whole show on the Amarna tablets. But all that to say, all of this dates the occupation there. And then we look at the fortifications. Well, Rich, you've been to Jericho. So when you go to Jericho, probably the most prominent thing is this stone wall at the southern, this curving stone wall. We call it the Cyclopean wall because the stones are so massive. The ancient people thought only a cyclops could put that in place. So this massive Cyclopean stone wall. Now, that was not built at the time of Joshua. That was built over 100 years before in the Middle Bronze Age 3 period. But the people who rebuilt Jericho in Jericho City 5 reused that stone wall and put a mud brick superstructure on top of it. And
so when you make your job easier.
Absolutely. You just reuse what's there. It's still standing. So let's just build new city walls. Those, when it talks about the city walls falling, it's talking about those mud brick. That mud brick superstructure is what collapsed, not the stone wall. The stone wall is still standing to this day. You can go and see it. And so we know, based on the dating of the most recent excavations by Lorenzo Negro, he dates those mud bricks. In fact, every major team, including his own, has found remains of just a few courses of mud bricks atop that Cyclopean wall. And he dates those to the time of Joshua. Now, he wouldn't say the time of Joshua. He dates it to City 5, to the late Bronze Age 1-2 horizon period, but that's my window that I'm looking at. And then, of course, the big key is there evidence for destruction?
Exactly.
That's what everybody wants to know.
Did
Have
they
we
burn
found
it?
the walls of Jericho? Did they burn Jericho? So here is what the latest excavations have shown. What's really interesting is that Lorenzo Negro has only just started publishing anything of substance on Jericho City 5, the late Bronze Age city, just within the past 2 years, really. He did one chapter in a book in 2020 that had a couple of paragraphs, but he just, the last 2 years, he's put some stuff out, which is actually just when I was writing my thesis. So it was beautiful timing to have that. And he looks at, there's a very famous photo or diagram that Kathleen Kenyon, from Kathleen Kenyon's excavations in Trench 1, which is the trench that's on the western side of the tell that she cut into the tell, where she finds, she traces the stone wall, and then she found this collapsed, almost like a ramp of red mud bricks. Now, she dated that to City 4, and that's part of why everybody has argued over City 4, because it's this beautiful collapsed mud bricks. Surely those are the walls of Jericho. She associated with them with City 4. Bryant Wood, to my mind, was the first who looked at those and said, those actually are the walls from Jericho, but he thought they were City 4. Here's what Lorenzo Negro now says. He's excavated another part of that stone wall, found the same thing previous teams have found. He dates it to the late Bronze Age. He dates it to City 5. Well, this to me, this is fantastic. I look at what the Bible says, and it says there should be collapsed walls in this time frame, and now we have the excavator there describing the walls that were previously thought to be from the Middle Bronze Age. He's saying, no, those are late Bronze Age walls now. That wall collapsed, and so we've got, it seems to fit to me there. And then we have some descriptions of destruction within the city. Kathleen Kenyon excavated a house within the city, and she said it was destroyed sometime in around the middle of the 14th century. Well, that's right within my chronological window for when this happened. Now, unfortunately, she doesn't describe the destruction, the nature of the destruction. She just says it was destroyed. The other thing that we have is that we have both Lorenzo Negro and John Garstang, who have identified areas of burnt debris, just either inside or outside of the city. Lorenzo Negro, unfortunately, has not been very specific about when that is, but he has noted that there is a drought of archaeological evidence in the 13th century at Jericho, which many people interpret as abandonment at the site. That's what he says. Well, first of all, that's when the late date people believe that Joshua's city fell, and they're just, Lorenzo is saying that Professor Negro says there's just not much there. And secondly, I would note, well, now we're in the 14th century. We're getting right into my window frame there too. And so when I look at all this, put this all together, what I see evidence of occupation in the pottery, in the scarabs, in the cuneiform tablet. I see both on the tell and in the tombs. I see evidence now of fortifications that have been described. By the way, this is the beautiful thing about that. If Negro is correct, we actually can trace that Cyclopean wall has been traced by multiple excavations almost all around the city, not quite on the eastern side because there's a modern road that kind of cuts that right through by where the spring is. But now we know how big Jericho was. It was 11 acres in size. So here's the problem. People, I think of the pictures I've seen of Jericho. It's taken on these mythic proportions. It's massive. It's huge city walls. It was actually a fairly small city. For comparison, in the late Bronze Age, Jericho's 11 acres, Hatzor is over 200 acres. Jericho's 11 acres, Megiddo's over almost 50 acres.
Yeah.
Even Lachish is 20 acres, I think, in the late Bronze Age. Jericho 11, right? It's not this massive city people have, it's kind of taken on in our consciousness through our songs and our videos and our pictures. But the evidence is there, I think, that it was occupied, that it was fortified, and that there is destruction sometime in that window. And the reality, Rich, is that in archaeology, we very rarely can pinpoint a specific event, a specific date, just because I pull a piece of pottery out, right? It's not like all the potters got together on January 1st, 1400 BC and said, all right, boys, girls, we're getting rid of that form. We're doing this form. That's just not how it worked. And so when we find it, it's always kind of in this window. And when I look at that and I look at the evidence, there does seem to be some alignment there.
I always tell people it's like kitchens. It's not like everyone remodels their kitchen the same way overnight. Trends change, but then they change to where everybody really wants it, and then they end up doing it. So I love that
That's right.
you leave that space there. And the fun piece of it too, even as you were describing those pharaohs and those scarabs that you found and things like that, those are the pharaohs we're talking about when we're on the Egypt trip, friends. These are the people, like this is the storyline. This is the narrative. You get a chance when you walk into places like the Bible. You get a chance to walk into places like Israel or into the biblical lands. You get to stand in real places. And I love that archaeology continues to find things that would hold to that of like, hey, conquest is a real thing. Jericho is a real thing. These are real places, real people, real time. And as we like to say on trips, it's the fifth gospel: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the land of the Bible. The land of the Bible speaks. The
Yep.
stones speak.
Yep.
These things speak, and we get a chance to learn and listen. And guys like you are doing the work for us. So I'm really grateful for that.
Well, and you know what? I like Mr. Professor Negro does not believe the Bible, the biblical account of the conquest. He has a different view of how scripture was composed, but that doesn't mean he's not a good archaeologist. He's done some
Exactly.
very good work there. He has made sense of a very confusing stratigraphy and harmonized their results with all the previous digs. I really do commend him for the work that he's done there. And as Christians, we don't need to avoid that or be afraid of it. We need to interact with that and analyze it and say, okay, you know, how does this align with what the Bible says? And that's really what I'm trying to do. We've got this ancient literary source and we've got this archaeology, and I'm going, okay, let's compare the two.
I think we're going to have a lot of trip leaders who are going to be like, Rich, I need to add Jericho back to my itinerary. I'm going to need some time there more than just at the gift shop. I want to go walk and stand and be able to read these stories so that people can begin to be in the place where we know they happened. And that's
That's right.
tons of fun. Kind of finishing this off, because this is what GTI is all about. It's all about bringing the land and the lessons of the Bible to life. And here you are, a person who spent quite a bit of time doing archaeology over at Shiloh and a couple other places, and now you're focusing in on Jericho. How is this time of studying and learning, how has that caused you to read the Bible differently? Or what's that brought out for you in your Christian walk?
Yeah, I've often heard people say when you go to the Holy Land, when you go take a tour of the place where these events happen, it changes the way you read the Bible. And I think that that's true. I'm not sure that it changes the way I interpret the Bible, but it
Exactly.
changes the way I read the Bible because now it's come to life. I can visualize it. One of the things that we're excavating at Shiloh that's pretty exciting is a monumental building with the
Mhm.
same proportions as the tabernacle, facing east-west. Just on the northern slope inside the city wall, we're finding three horns of an altar around there, pomegranates around there. And so it seems to have some worship-related item, worship-related purpose. Just off to the east, there is what we call a favisa, which is where they buried all of the things. That was like a sacred dump. So we're excavate. That's where I excavate each year, is in the Favisa. It's this. We're finding tens of thousands of animal bones that match the biblical Jewish sacrificial system, and some pieces of gold and some really cool things there. And we can date that because of the pottery, so we know when that is there. And so when I go to Shiloh, I have stood right at the eastern end of that monumental building, and I have read the story in my Bible there of Hannah praying
Yeah.
at the entrance to the tabernacle, because we haven't officially said this is the tabernacle there, but that's our working theory. And I'm thinking, what else could it be? It's very rare to find a structure of that size
Yeah.
related to worship that dates to the same time period. I'm not sure what else it could be there. So I've read that there. When I go to Jericho, I've been there and looked at that stone wall and imagined the bricks standing, because we know how wide the brick remains of the brick wall were. It stood probably another 19 feet tall on top of that, 6 meters tall. And I've just looked up and imagined, right? The Bible says that they were these places were walled up to the heavens, it says. And I imagined, I stand there and I go, boy, that would have looked like that to them. And so it comes alive. And so to me, that is one of the values, in addition to illuminating, telling us more about the background of the Bible and affirming the Bible. For me as a person, when I go and stand in these sites, I say this all the time to people. I say the Bible is describing authentic, actual people, authentic places, accurate history.
Mhm.
That's what it's describing. And the more we discover, the more that just is confirmed to me in my mind. And so it's pretty exciting to stand in these places where these events happened and read these pieces of the Bible about those actual events in the places they happened.
And you're so right. We say this to people all the time. You do not have to come to the Holy Land, to Israel, to the biblical lands, these places to be able to know your Bible and to know God. He's given that
Yeah,
to
yeah,
us in Scripture.
yeah.
But there is something amazing, and I always call it like it brings it from like black and white to color or color to 3D when you get a chance to be in these places and see it the way it's being described. And I am one of those people that is grateful too that as archaeology, the science of that continues to happen, is that it affirms in many ways things that we know about the text. And so that's a really amazing thing. And especially for those of us who believe the Bible to be true, it's great when we see that happen. And when it doesn't always happen, doesn't mean we're in trouble. And that's why I love guys like you who are like, I'm just gonna dig and we're gonna see what we find. And as a believer, it's something that you're like, well, again, I don't need this to believe in God, but man, it's sure great when those kind of things pop out. So as we finish this off, I want to lay this out there for you. You wrote a book. It's not a long book, which is really great because I know a lot of you are like, I don't like to read a ton. It's not huge. Like this is a doable book. And again, you're getting to know Brian. Like you understand, like he is not like going to bore your socks off, but rather he's giving you great information. Can you tell us a little bit about the book and any other resources or places we should go just to pick up the book, but to read other things you guys have?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll pump my own book. So my book is called Joshua's Jericho, the latest archaeological research for the conquest. And it's available on Amazon. I did a podcast with Sean McDowell recently, and he said, it's really readable, actually. And so that tends to be my style of talking and writing is to be accessible to the average person. And so it's available on Amazon. ABR has a great website, BibleArchaeology.org. I have my own website called BibleArchaeologyReport.com. And so you can find more information there. If your viewers, your listeners are wanting a good introduction to archaeology, our dig director at Shiloh, Dr. Scott Stripling, has written an excellent little book called The Truth and the Trowel. Again, not a big book and very readable, but just a good overview of these different ages that we talk about in archaeology: the early Bronze Age, the middle Bronze Age, the late Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and the biblical events that happened there. When I'm excavating, sometimes I'll say, oh, this is great, this is late Bronze Age. They'll say, okay, which biblical person? Because that's what they think of, right? So I sometimes like, oh, okay, so this would be time of Joshua. Iron Age. Okay, well, that's time of David, intermediate Bronze Age into the middle Bronze Age. Okay, that's time of Abraham. And so Scott's book is an excellent book as well. And so those are the two books that I would encourage people to start with: The Trowel and the Truth by Scott Stripling, and my book, Joshua's Jericho. And you can get both on Amazon or your local Christian bookstore or ABR's bookstore. We have a bookstore on our website at BibleArchaeology.org.
Friends, all those things are in our show notes. We would encourage you to check it out, and hoping that it just takes you deeper as you're studying and as you dive into the land and the lessons of the Bible, that you'll be learning more. Brian, thanks so much for taking the time. I know this was last second. We put this together and here we are, the two of us getting a chance to talk it through. And I really appreciated our time together.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Rich. Yeah, let me just say this, and I want all your viewers to know this. I have not been paid to say this, but I would just, check out GTI Tours and really do consider going on a tour. First time I went to the Holy Land and got to tour and walk in some of these sites, it is a very meaningful experience that just is very helpful to build your faith. And so just encourage your viewers or listeners to do that. You didn't tell me to do that, Rich, but I thought I'd slip that in because I think it's a good thing you guys are doing.
Because we're camp friends, because we both ran
That's right.
camp stuff. That's why. Well, friends, it was a great chance to just be with you guys on this podcast. And until the next podcast, take Take care. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. For more information on upcoming GTI study tours, please find us on the web at www.gtitours.org.